Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Olivia. I'm also known as the Carnivore Ballerina, and today's topic of discussion is mold. In my last video, I spoke about radiation poisoning and heavy metal poisoning, and I said I was going to talk about mold next. So that's what we're doing today. I'll first give a bit of a backstory as to how I even got in a situation near mold and the symptoms I had, as well as some other things that could have contributed to making the symptoms I had even worse, and just making the whole thing and experience all around a lot worse. And then I'll get into things that I did to detox, and that kind of will summarize the whole video. Yeah. So it all started around the age of 14, 15, more so 15, where I was getting exposed to mold. And this all happened because I started training professionally in ballet. I'm a late starter, and if you don't know anything about ballet, starting at the age of 14 is fairly late. 12 is late, but 14 is obviously later. Anyways, so I started training professionally with the best school in the country where I was living at the time, and unfortunately, that school was very poorly funded. So they were very old buildings and not well maintained, and that is where the mold came in. For my first year training at that school, it was okay because our school was divided in two different buildings. The 4 lower levels were in one building, and then the 4 more advanced levels were in another building. My first year, I was in the less advanced level building. And there was not quite as much mold. It was a newer building, whereas the other building was a lot older, a lot less maintained, and was just covered completely in mold. So during my first year of training, I rarely went to that building unless we had an exam, which was towards the end of the year, but I rarely visited that building. So I felt great. I never even thought about health, fitness, vitality, how I felt. That was not even part of my reality, just because I felt good, so I didn't have to think about it. It wasn't on my mind. But then in the second year, I started to feel a bit bloated and not well, and I think that was also due to some radiation poisoning, which it only just occurred to me like a month ago that was the beginning of it. But so I'll get into that at another point. But so I started to not feel well a bit into my second year, and in my second year we were in the 4th level, so we were on the verge of switching to the advanced levels. So we would travel more so between the younger students building and the older students building with the mold. So I was visiting the moldy building a lot more than before. So sometimes I would eat my meals in that building. I would train obviously in that building, so we're breathing in all the lovely moldy, dusty air. But it wasn't until the next year where I was fully submerged in the moldy building, basically living in it, because our hours were a lot more intense, so we kind of lived there most of the year in that moldy building. Before I get into the moldy building year, the previous year where I was in between the moldy building and the other building, which was not quite as bad, there were some things that I think contributed to a lot of other health problems that I had and have thankfully healed from. A lot of those things I think came from overworking myself, malnourishment, and obviously the mold. I had huge problems processing things. I remember just breaking out in tears, like hysterical crying, because I just couldn't handle my classmates. That's pretty bad. One day. And also at the age of 15, for almost half a year, I was living alone 2.5 hours away from my family, and it was in a moldy apartment, so obviously that didn't help. So that's even more mold exposure plus water damage. During the year that I was living alone for a bit, a lot of things had happened. I was overworking myself excessively because halfway through that year, reality hit me that I was terrible, terrible at dancing, and most probably had no chance whatsoever at doing ballet professionally ever. So I, out of just fear of not being able to dance, like messaged my teacher and immediately started private lessons every single day of the week, in addition to going to that school, the most prestigious school in the country, whatever. So that's why I began living alone, so that I could train for 2 hours in the morning privately, walk 20 minutes to the school because I thought I was fat and needed to lose weight and exercise even more, which was just so stupid, and then train for another 4 hours, and then towards the end of the year, probably around 6 hours, because we had rehearsals, we had more classes, we were preparing for exams, all that stuff. So I think it was a combination of the mold, overworking, malnourishment, because I didn't eat what I was sent for the week. I didn't cook either because I was sent food, and I wouldn't always eat that food despite saying I would eat it because I thought I needed to lose weight. I abused coffee because I thought, this is great for energy and weight loss and fast metabolism. No. So yeah, I severely overworked myself for a good 4.5-ish months, and every single weekend when I went home, I would just sleep and excessively eat. And that's all I did because I was just so worn out. And at the end of that year, I was just like, I had it and really had no energy. I did pass my exam with the highest mark, so that was amazing for me at the time. But looking back, I was really stupid with my working routine and obviously ethic, I guess. Moving on to the next year, where I was exposed to the moldy building the whole year, the bigger building compared to the smaller building. I was now here in the moldy building. I severely reduced my private lesson hours. I think I was doing just 3 classes a week in addition to my training, because I was just so worn out from the year beforehand that I just couldn't do it, and it was too much for me. But that year, I lived the whole year in the city with my mom this time, not alone, and every single apartment we stayed in was either musty or moldy, so there we go again, mold. In addition to the school having mold and eating and living basically in that building, which had mold. At the time, we didn't know what was wrong with me. We thought I was just severely fatigued or something, so we were trying some alternative therapies, medicines, and things, but we didn't know what we were looking for, so we had no idea. But towards the end of the year, we kind of diagnosed that I had Epstein-Barr because I was just so chronically fatigued and brain fog, and once again couldn't process just interactions with my classmates. I kind of became a bit antisocial because somehow it was just so overwhelming to interact with people. It was also difficult to process emotions or things that would happen. It was just difficult for me to process. I got a lot of joint pain and headaches. It was difficult sleeping. During this whole time, though, I was basically animal based. I would have chocolate, coffee, and that was probably it aside from meat. I did have spices, but the quality of meat there was not great, so I think that also didn't help, as well as obviously the mold situation going on. Looking back, it should have been very obvious that there was mold on the walls and that we were sitting against it and that it is moldy, but I didn't realize. I can see in a lot of photos and videos now that it's clearly mold and water damage that was there and causing the problem. Towards the end of the year of my training at that moldy building, I had to drop every single one of my classes except for the most basic one, which is just ballet technique, which is about an hour and a half, because I just couldn't physically do it. I would just bend down to pick something and come back up, and I would kind of have to sit down, lay down. I just felt so dizzy and fatigued. I remember during my exam, we have to perform a little solo or variation, and at the end of it, I walked out of the room and just fell on the floor, collapsed, and I think my classmates just thought I was kind of being silly, like, oh, I'm done. But no, I just physically couldn't hold my body up anymore. Still don't know what my exam marks are, though. Yeah, I don't know what my exam marks are, and I really don't care, because, yeah, whatever. Towards the end of that year, my mom did start researching into other alternative therapies that she could just do herself for me, because nothing was really working and we didn't really know what else to do. And in the end, those therapies that she found and has done have made most of the difference for most of my health, so I'm very thankful for that. But so the other stuff that I did use to get rid of the mold, because that was my last year, the last year where I was in the moldy building that I was just talking about, that was my last year at that school, just because 2020 happened and the whole school shut down. So they could take that time to clean the mold, but I'm not sure if they did that. Anyways, so that was my last year exposed to that extreme mold, and then I was just in like musty buildings since then. But so what did I do to detox the mold out of my system? Starting off, I took a lot of different binders or things to pull it out, such as zeolite, activated charcoal, bentonite clay, and oregano oil. The reason why I took a bunch of different things and not just sticking with one thing, I'm sure I took other stuff, but it's not coming to mind right now. But the reason why you would take a bunch of different types of things, and the same goes for parasites, because unfortunately I have had an experience with those as well. But so the reason why you would take a bunch of different things is after about a week of taking the same thing, the parasites and or mold kind of get used to it, and it doesn't quite pull it out as well. So then you would switch it up, and they'll be like, oh, there's some other new thing coming, can't handle it, and then it pulls them out. So that's a really bad way of explaining why you would take different forms of binders. Yeah. Another thing that gets rid of mold is going to a sauna and sweating it out. I have not tried that myself, but I would like to. Not that I have mold anymore, but just because there's so many environmental toxins, I think it would be beneficial anyway to do a detox every once in a while, as I have learned is kind of necessary at this point. Doing that or an infrared sauna or using red light therapy can be beneficial as well. Once again, haven't tried that one either, so I don't know if it actually works, so don't quote me on that. And then obviously the most obvious thing, which would help getting rid of mold and parasites, is just getting rid of all form of sugars and carbs, because they kind of live on those things. Anything that is damp in your diet will help the mold and the parasites grow. So that's why you would remove that. If you want to eat them again, you can eat them after, I guess. That's up to you. But removing those things really makes a huge difference. So yeah, hopefully you don't have mold and don't have to do that. But if you do, get rid of those things. One more thing before I finish this video is the reason I got major skin issues, I think, is because of parasites and mold as well. One of the common symptoms of mold poisoning exposure, whatever, is eczema and just skin rashes, psoriasis, and all that lovely stuff. So it was actually about 4 to 5 months after I left that school completely that I started to get skin issues. So that's why I think it could have been from that, like a later effect. Maybe I had something that triggered the mold inside me to then come out, because I did not start taking anything for the mold until way after that time anyway. So I do think that caused skin problems, which I will talk about in a later time, because I do have a certain regimen which I follow now, which is or has been the most effective, because not only internally do you need to take stuff and change it, such as diet and taking binders and things to get rid of the toxins which are causing that purge, but also there's some things that you can layer on top, which will make a huge difference, of course. So that is probably what my next video will be on. So if you're interested in learning about that, if you hopefully you don't have skin problems, but if you do, then I hope that whatever I say in that video will be really helpful, because it was helpful for me, obviously. I still, of course, have some scarring, but I'm getting there. It's only been 1.5 years, so we're powering through. Anyways, I hope this was interesting. Thank you for watching. I do interviews as well, so if you're interested in success stories like I am, because I love hearing about them, it's very motivating and inspiring to me. So if you want to hear those, you can go check them out on my channel. If not, then thanks for watching, and I hope you come back.